It satisfies to begin at the end. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Ashford Motors Tower smelled of Italian leather and old money. 14 directors sat around a table worth more than most families earn in a decade, and not one of them could look at the man standing at the head of it. Marcus Cole wore no tie, no jacket, no apology. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearm, and if you looked closely, you could still see the faint crescent of engine grease along his left wrist, the kind that never fully washes out, no matter how hard you scrub. Derek Harrington was on his feet, face mottled crimson, jabbing a leather folio toward the screen. "Victoria, you cannot seriously allow a mechanic to stand here, and—" Marcus didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply opened his laptop and let the first slide breathe. "Mr. Harrington, I'm not a mechanic. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Automotive Engineering from Georgia Tech, class of 2014, with an published emphasis in hybrid powertrain efficiency. And what you're looking at is 73 reasons your career ends today." Victoria Ashford sat at the far end of the table. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her single nod carried the weight of a woman who had finally chosen which fire to walk through. 6 weeks earlier, none of them had ever heard of Marcus Cole. Milbrook. Georgia held the kind of silence that either heals you or buries you. Population 4,000 and change. 1 traffic light, 0 pretense. Marcus had moved there after Sarah died. 3 years ago this October, a rainy Tuesday on OE85, when a fuel tanker jackknifed across 3 lanes and rewrote his entire life in 4 seconds. He never talked about it. There was a photograph on the refrigerator of a woman laughing beside a restored 1971 Chevelle, and beneath it, in her handwriting, Sarah Cole, 1987 to 2021. That was enough. Some grief is too precise for words. What Sarah left behind was a man who could diagnose a failing camshaft by sound alone, and a daughter who had inherited her mother's gap-toothed smile and her father's stubborn curiosity about how things work. Maya Cole was 7 years old, built like a dandelion, thin, bright, impossible to kill. Every morning she came downstairs carrying some new contraption made of cardboard and electrical tape. And every morning Marcus pretended to be surprised. That Tuesday was no different. She appeared at the kitchen table holding a shoebox engine with 4 labeled chambers: intake, compression, power, exhaust, and explained the combustion cycle with the confidence of a doctoral candidate and the vocabulary of a second grader. Marcus poured the last of the cereal into her bowl and drank his coffee black, watching her, thinking this was worth every unpaid bill on the counter. And there were many. Our rent was $800. The power company had sent its second warning. His checking account held $62, and the quiet dignity of a man who refused to let his daughter see him, afraid. He dropped Maya at the bus stop at 7:15, watched until the yellow doors folded shut, then drove his truck, a 2004 F-150 with 241,000 miles of loyalty on the odometer, to Ray Callahan's shop on Route 9. Ray was 63, white-haired, and the closest thing to a father figure Marcus had allowed himself since burying his own dad at 19. The shop smelled of brake dust and honesty. A customer brought in a 2012 Toyota Camry that another garage had quoted $1,400 to rebuild the transmission. Marcus listened to the engine for 30 seconds, then dropped the diagnosis without theater. "It's not your transmission. It's a $47 torque converter solenoid. Part number FP2847. Yeah, I can have it done by 3. The customer blinked. Ray, leaning in the doorway, just shook his head the way he always did. Half admiration, half sorrow for a man charging $50 an hour when his hands were worth $500. It was nearly noon when Marcus took the back road home. The sun sat high and white over Milbrook, bleaching the fields to bone. He almost didn't see her. Just beyond the curve past the old oak line, a child stumbled onto the gravel shoulder. Barefoot, dress torn at the hem, dark hair matted against her temples. She was clutching a stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Marcus braked hard enough to leave rubber. He stepped out slowly, knelt, brought his eyes level with hers, because that is what you do when a child is frightened. You make yourself small so they can feel big enough to speak. Hey, my name's Marcus. Can you tell me yours? Her chin trembled. Lily. A breath. And then, the man took Mommy's phone and she didn't come back. He carried her to the cab, gave her water, buckled her in. She weighed almost nothing. At the sheriff's station, Deputy Hernandez ran the name through 3 databases and found no matching missing child report. Not one. Marcus watched the deputy's face and saw the same unease he felt. A well-dressed child, clearly cared for, and yet nobody in any system was looking for her. We'll keep her here tonight, Hernandez said. Lily's hand locked around Marcus's wrist like a vice. Her eyes went wide and wet and desperate. Please, don't leave me here. Please. He could have walked away. Any reasonable man might have. But Marcus Cole had rocked a motherless child through 912 nights of grief. And he knew exactly what that particular terror sounds like. He signed the temporary custody form at 6:14 p.m. Imaya met Lily at the front door with the enthusiasm of a girl who had been asking for a sister since she could form sentences. Within an hour, they were on the living room floor, building a bridge out of popsicle sticks for Maya's toy cars, while Marcus made spaghetti. The meal he always made when the budget said no to everything else. Lily spoke in fragments. Mommy took her to a big building in a city. Mommy said, "Wait 10 minutes." There was shouting. Lily ran. The stuffed rabbit was the only thing she grabbed. Marcus stood at the stove, turning the wooden spoon slowly, and felt something cold settle in his ribs. What kind of emergency makes a mother leave a 7-year-old alone long enough for the child to flee into rural Georgia? The answer arrived the next morning in 3 black Cadillac Escalades. Marcus was under a hood when they pulled into the lot. 4 men in dark suits fanned out first. Earpieces, scanning the perimeter with the efficiency of people trained to anticipate threats. Then she emerged. White blazer, hair pulled tight, heels striking the pavement with the precise rhythm of a woman who controlled rooms for a living. But her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, and her hands trembled around a photograph she held out to Ray's receptionist like a prayer. Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Motors, $4.7 billion in annual revenue. Her husband had died in a Gulf Stream crash 8 months ago, and the financial press had spent every week since speculating whether she could hold the empire together. None of them had reported that her daughter was missing. Marcus stepped into the lot, wiping his hands on a rag. Victoria turned. For 3 full seconds, neither of them spoke. The billionaire and the mechanic, standing 6 feet apart in a gravel parking lot in a town she'd never heard of, He connected by a child who trusted him more than she trusted her own mother. Then Lily ran out the shop's side door, and she did not run to Victoria. She ran to Marcus, wrapped both arms around his leg, and buried her face against his knee. The sound Victoria made was barely human. A low, fractured exhale that carried 8 months of compounded loss. She knelt on the gravel in her $400 shoes and reached for her daughter, and Lily let herself be held. I but kept one hand on Marcus's wrist. Victoria stayed in Milbrook 3 days. Not because the legal paperwork required it. Her attorneys could have resolved custody in hours. But because Lily would not eat unless Marcus was in the room, would not sleep unless Maya was beside her. On the second evening, while the girls chased fireflies in the yard, Victoria's rented sedan threw a check engine light. Marcus had it diagnosed in 90 seconds. A loose gas cap triggering the evaporative emission system, a nothing repair. But Victoria watched him work with an expression that had nothing to do with cars. She was calculating, measuring, filing away data the way a CEO does when she finds a resource everyone else has overlooked. On the third morning, she made her offer. Ashford Motors was launching a community automotive foundation, free vehicle repair and job training for low-income families. She needed a director who understood engines and understood poverty, and she had just watched a man who embodied both. Marcus would relocate to Atlanta. Housing provided. Maya enrolled in a top-rated school. Lily, she added quietly, had asked for him every night. Marcus studied the check in her hand. Then he folded it and set it on the counter unsigned. I don't take payment for doing what's right. But if you're offering work, real work, helping families who look like mine, I'll hear you out. He moved to Atlanta 6 days later. Victoria arranged a small furnished apartment 12 minutes from Ashford Tower. Maya started second grade at a school with a proper science lab, which she declared the greatest event of her life. Marcus reported to the 47th floor on a Monday morning wearing clean boots, a pressed shirt, and the quiet certainty of a man who has never once needed a room to validate him. Derek Harrington was waiting in the corridor. Harrington was 56, silver-templed, 11 years as chief operating officer, and he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who believed hierarchy was a natural law. He looked at Marcus the way you look at a coffee stain on a conference table, an imperfection to be managed before real business resumes. Victoria, I wasn't aware the foundation initiative included field-level consultants. His smile never reached his eyes. And perhaps Mr. Cole would find the service bay more comfortable. Our maintenance team is excellent. In the meeting that followed, Marcus presented a plan for mobile repair units serving rural communities within a 100-mile radius of Atlanta. Cost projections, staffing models, parts partnerships, all built on the kitchen table in Milbrook over 3 nights. Harrington listened the way a cat watches a mouse it has already decided to eat. He interrupted twice, or once to question credentials Marcus hadn't been asked to provide, and once to suggest the foundation would benefit from someone with, as he phrased it, a more institutional background. Marcus let the silences do his fighting. He did not flinch. He did not explain himself. He simply turned to the next slide. After the meeting, the showroom's diagnostic station locked up, the OBD2 scanner cycling false trouble codes, 2 technicians arguing over the wiring. Marcus passed on his way to the elevator, glanced at the screen for perhaps 15 seconds, and spoke without stopping. Your CAN bus has a 120 ohm termination resistor failure at pin 6 on the DLC connector. Replace the resistor. 4 minutes. The senior technician stared, then tried it. The system cleared instantly. In the back of the room, woman with a lanyard, reading Rosa Gutierrez, HR compliance, watched the entire exchange and wrote something in a small notebook before walking away. That night, in the apartment that still smelled like someone else's furniture, Marcus opened his laptop and typed 3 words into a search engine: Ashford Motors discrimination. The results were buried. 4 small articles across regional outlets, none picked up nationally. But the names were there. He counted them one by one. 73 black employees terminated or denied promotion in 6 years. He pulled Ashford's published diversity reports and cross-referenced the numbers. Average performance review duration for white employees, 5.1 minutes. For black employees, 2.3. Promotion rate for white managers, 34%. For black managers, 0. He closed the laptop slowly. Maya was asleep on the couch, her cardboard engine resting on her stomach, rising and falling with each breath. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Marcus looked at his daughter and thought about 73 other parents who had come home carrying the same quiet shame he knew by heart. The shame of being told in 1,000 coded ways that your best will never be enough because of something you cannot change. He did not know, as he sat in that silence, that 6 miles across the city, Derek Harrington was parked in a black sedan outside a data broker's office. The phone was already at his ear. I need everything on a Marcus Cole. Milbrook, Georgia, where he lives, where his daughter goes to school. Bank records if you can get them. Everything. The line clicked dead. The sedan pulled away. And in a small apartment filled with second-hand furniture and a sleeping child steady breathing, Marcus Cole had no idea that the 73 names on his screen were about to become 74. The call came during Maya's lunch period. Principal Edding spoke in the careful, over-enunciated tone of a woman trained to deliver bad news without accepting liability. There had been an incident in the cafeteria. A boy named Trent Calloway, son of an Ashford Motors regional sales director, told Maya that her father was a grease monkey who snuck into a real company by pretending to be something he wasn't. Maya did not cry. She did not shout. She stood up from the table, looked the boy in the eye, and delivered a sentence that would have made her mother proud. "Why, my daddy can rebuild a transmission blindfolded. What can yours do besides wear a tie?" The principal called it a disruption. Marcus called it the truth. He picked Maya up early that afternoon. She was quiet in the truck, legs swinging above the floorboard, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline like she was trying to solve it. 4 blocks from the apartment, she finally spoke, her voice small but unbroken. "Daddy, how come people act like fixing things isn't as good as owning things?" Marcus pulled over. He turned in his seat so he could see her full face, the gap in her teeth, the furrow between her brows that was pure Sarah. "Listen to me, baby girl. The people who build things and the people who fix things are the ones holding this world together. Every bridge you cross, every car that gets a mama to work, every light that turns on when you flip the switch, that's somebody's hands. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for being useful? Not ever." She nodded once, fierce and final, and he drove the rest of the way home, gripping the wheel hard enough to leave impressions in his palms. Because what he didn't say, what he could not say to a 7-year-old, was that the boy in the cafeteria hadn't invented that cruelty on his own. Someone at a dinner table had handed him those words like a loaded weapon, and that someone almost certainly worked on the 47th floor. 3 days later, Marcus was at Henderson's Auto Supply on Peachtree Industrial, picking up brake pads for the Foundation's first mobile unit, when a voice behind him said his name like a question and an accusation at once. Darnell Washington was 44, broad-shouldered, and standing in the discount aisle of a parts store he never should have needed to visit. 12 years he'd given Ashford Motors, as he had designed the intake manifold geometry on the Ashford Meridian, the truck that accounted for 31% of the company's North American revenue. And his name appeared nowhere in the patent filings. His termination letter, dated March 2022, cited misalignment with evolving departmental culture. His last performance review, filed 6 weeks before that letter, rated him 4.6 out of 5. They told me I wasn't Ashford material. Darnell's voice was steady, but his hands were not. I designed the engine in their best-selling truck, brother, and they walked me out with a cardboard box like I'd stolen something. Marcus stood in that fluorescent-lit aisle and felt the architecture of something vast and deliberate take shape in his mind. Darnell was not an anomaly. Darnell was a data point in a pattern engineered to be invisible. Each termination isolated enough to seem individual, spaced far enough apart to avoid statistical scrutiny, or worded carefully enough to survive a cursory legal review. It was elegant, in the way a disease is elegant. It didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be consistent. He drove back to the apartment that evening carrying brake pads and the name of every former colleague Darnell could remember. The list filled 2 pages. 6 miles north, in the mahogany stillness of his corner office, Derek Harrington convened what he called a culture alignment review, a meeting that appeared on no official calendar and generated no minutes. 3 senior managers sat across from him: Regional VP Howard Sims, HR Director Candace Morrow, and Legal Counsel David Price. The subject was Marcus Cole. Harrington laid a folder on the table. Background check. Georgia Tech transcript, which confirmed the degree Harrington had publicly dismissed. A bank statement showing a checking balance that hadn't exceeded 3 figures in 19 months. A custody filing from Milbrook, the school Maya attended. Victoria's charity project is asking questions he has no business asking. Harrington's tone carried the bored menace of a man who considered other people's ambitions a scheduling inconvenience. He's been accessing personnel directories, downloading org charts, and requesting historical staffing data from Rosa Gutierrez in compliance. Candace Morrow shifted in her chair. Should we involve outside counsel? We handle this in-house. Harrington closed the folder. A man with $62 and a daughter in a new school doesn't start wars he can't afford to lose. Restrict his system access to Foundation files only. And remind Rosa that her position reviews are coming up. What Harrington did not know, what his considerable intelligence had failed to account for, was that Rosa Gutierrez had spent 4 years preparing for exactly this moment. She found Marcus in the parking garage at 6:40 p.m., 2 levels below the security camera's reach. She did not waste time with pleasantries. From her bag, she produced a USB drive, matte black, unmarked, the kind you buy with cash at a store that doesn't ask for receipts. 4 years. Her voice was low, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of exhaustion that only comes from carrying a secret too long. 73 names, every termination letter, every performance review, every HR complaint that Candace Morrow was told to bury. I made copies of everything because I knew someday someone would walk through that door and actually give a damn. Marcus held the drive in his palm. What, it weighed less than an ounce. It contained the evidence of 73 stolen careers. "Why me?" he asked. "Why now?" Rosa looked at him with the clear eyes of a woman who had already calculated the cost. "Because you're the first person they couldn't scare away before they got close enough to see." The next 3 weeks disappeared into a rhythm of controlled urgency. By day, Marcus ran the foundation, scheduling mobile repair routes, interviewing mechanic candidates, building something real from Victoria's funding and his own blueprints. By night, after Maya fell asleep with her science textbook open on her chest, he opened the USB drive and entered a world of institutional precision designed to destroy lives without leaving fingerprints. The data was meticulous. Rosa had organized it chronologically. Terminations, lateral transfers to dead-end departments, performance reviews truncated to fractions of their standard duration. And Marcus built a spreadsheet cross-referencing every case with department, supervisor, date, and stated reason. The pattern emerged like a photograph in a darkroom. Slow, then sudden, then undeniable. Every black employee who reached a threshold of visibility, project lead, senior engineer, department supervisor, was reassigned within 90 days and terminated within 6 months. The language rotated just enough to avoid repetition. Cultural misfit, leadership gap, strategic realignment, a performance plateau. Not one of the 73 had received a review score below 4.2. He met 8 of them over those weeks. Kitchen tables in Decatur, a coffee shop in East Point, a park bench in College Park where a woman named Patricia Hayes told him she'd managed the Southeast sales region to a 23% profit increase before being transferred to a satellite office with no staff and no budget. "They didn't fire me," she said, watching her grandchildren on the swings. "They just made sure there was nothing left to do until I fired myself." Maya helped him sort the printed documents each evening, arranging pages by alphabetical order without understanding their contents, humming the periodic table song her science teacher had taught her. One night, while she taped a color-coded index tab to a folder marked Hayes P., she looked up. "Daddy, are you helping people again?" "Trying to. Baby girl." "Good." She pressed the tab down firmly. "Mama always said you were better at helping than you were at asking for help." He let that land without responding because she was right, and because hearing Sarah's observations in Maya's voice was the kind of pain that doesn't get easier. It just gets more familiar. At the tower, Marcus's competence continued to surface in ways he couldn't fully conceal. The Ashford Meridian's 2024 model had been plaguing the engineering team with an intermittent fuel hesitation at highway speeds. A ghost in the system that 3 senior engineers and an outside consultant had failed to isolate in 11 weeks. Marcus was passing through the test bay when he heard the misfire, stopped, listened for 8 seconds, and identified it without touching the hood. "Your fuel injection mapping is drifting 0.3 milliseconds at 3,200 RPM. It's a known calibration issue on the direct injection variant. Technical Service Bulletin 24F I0847. The fix takes 40 minutes. The lead engineer verified it within the hour. Victoria was on the mezzanine above the test bay when it happened. She watched Marcus walk away without waiting for acknowledgement, and something in her expression shifted. The look of a woman recalculating an equation she thought she'd already solved. That evening, In the hallway outside the foundation office, she stopped him. "Marcus, who are you, really?" He met her gaze but offered nothing. The time was not yet right, and the truth he carried was heavier than credentials. Harrington struck 12 days later, and he struck where it would hurt most. The first blow was economic. 3 auto parts suppliers Marcus had been negotiating with for the Foundation's mobile units received calls from Ashford's procurement division. Not threatening, were never threatening, just a gentle reminder that their existing contracts with the company were subject to annual review. 2 of them withdrew their bids within 48 hours. The third stopped returning Marcus's calls. The second blow was personal. Marcus came home on a Thursday evening to find a letter taped to his apartment door. The building management company, owned, he would later discover, by a subsidiary of a real estate group whose board included David Price's brother-in-law, had revised his lease terms. Monthly rent effective in 30 days, $1,400, nearly double. No explanation, no negotiation. Maya found the letter before he could hide it. She read the number slowly, the way children read things they don't fully understand but can feel the weight of. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" Marcus knelt, eye level, hands on her shoulders. "Coles don't quit, or baby girl. We never have, and we are not starting tonight." After she fell asleep, he sat in the truck in the parking lot, engine off, staring at the photograph of Sarah he kept tucked behind the sun visor. The streetlight threw orange shadows across the cab. For the first time in 3 weeks, the weight of it pressed down hard enough to bend him. 73 families, a daughter in a school she loved, $62 that had become $41. Every rational calculation told him to take what he had, protect what was his, and walk away from a fight that could swallow them both. His phone rang. Rosa. Her voice was tight with something between terror and revelation. "Marcus, I found something else. The discrimination protocol. It didn't start with Harrington. I pulled archived board resolutions from the corporate vault. There's a document from 1994, signed by Richard Ashford Sr. himself. It established something called cultural alignment standards. It's the template for everything Harrington has been doing. This goes back 30 years. 4 COOs have maintained it. We're not looking at one man's racism. We're looking at a founding corporate policy." Marcus closed his eyes. Richard Ashford Sr., Victoria's father-in-law. The man whose portrait hung in the tower lobby, whose name was etched into the cornerstone of the building where Victoria sat every morning believing she was leading a company built on merit. The scope had changed. This was no longer 73 cases and 6 years. This was 247 employees across 3 decades. An estimated $14.2 million in lost wages. Violations of Title VII. 42 U.S.C. Section 1981 and Section 1983, Federal Territory, Department of Justice Territory. As he called Attorney James Whitfield at 10:14 p.m., a civil rights lawyer out of Birmingham who had been circling Ashford Motors for 8 years without enough internal evidence to land. Whitfield answered on the second ring, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about how long the man had been waiting. "I have 73 personnel files, a 30-year board resolution, internal emails, and 8 witnesses willing to testify." Marcus's voice was calm, each word placed with the precision of a man who understood that engines and evidence follow the same principle. Every component must connect, or the whole thing fails. Whitfield was quiet for 4 seconds. When? I need 3 days. The preparation consumed every hour that wasn't claimed by Maya or the foundation. Victoria called on the second evening, her voice carrying a frost Marcus hadn't heard before. Derek tells me you've been accessing confidential personnel files. That you've been meeting with former employees. Is this true? He held the phone and measured the silence. 3 seconds. Victoria, I need you to trust me for 24 more hours. Can you do that? The line held. In the background, he could hear Lily's voice, singing something, the melody blurred by distance. Then Victoria exhaled, and when she spoke again, the frost had cracked into something more complicated. 24 hours. What Marcus did not know was that 6 hours earlier, Victoria had been in the corporate archive herself. She had gone looking for procurement records and found instead a manila folder misfiled between Q3 reports from 1993. A folder bearing her father-in-law's handwriting and the words Alignment Protocol. Internal use only. She had read it twice, sitting on the archive floor with her back against a filing cabinet, and she had not told anyone. Not Harrington, not legal, not Marcus. She was still deciding what it meant to inherit an empire built on a lie she had never been told. The last night before the board meeting, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with 247 pages of evidence organized into a timeline that stretched from 1994 to the present. Attorney Whitfield had confirmed the forensic analysis was complete, including, critically, a metadata report on a falsified criminal record that Harrington's personal computer had generated 72 hours earlier, authored by user D. Harrington at 11:43 p.m., traceable to his home IP address. Whitfield's digital forensics team had it locked down cold. 8 former employees had confirmed their willingness to testify. Rosa had provided a signed affidavit. The DOJ had been notified through Whitfield's contacts and had opened a preliminary inquiry. Smaya padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, holding the cardboard engine she'd built in Milbrook, the one with 4 chambers labeled in crayon, the one that had traveled from a small kitchen table in Georgia to this apartment in Atlanta without losing a single piece of tape. For good luck, Daddy. She placed it beside his laptop. 4 strokes, intake, compression, power, exhaust, just like you taught me. He pulled her onto his lap and held her against his chest, and feeling her heart beat against his. Quick and trusting, and utterly unaware of what tomorrow would cost, or what it might build. Tomorrow, baby girl. Tomorrow, everything changes. She fell asleep there, and he carried her to bed the way he had carried her through 912 nights of grief, carefully, completely, as though she were the only engine that mattered. Across the city, in a black sedan parked beneath a streetlight on Marcus's block, Derek Harrington watched the apartment lights go dark one window at a time. On the passenger seat beside him lay a manila envelope containing a fabricated criminal record bearing Marcus Cole's name, a forged arrest report, and a cover letter addressed to every board member's private email. His finger hovered over the send button on his phone. He pressed it at 11:51 p.m. The message landed in 14 inboxes simultaneously. And in a quiet apartment where a cardboard engine sat beside a laptop full of truth, Marcus Cole slept beside his daughter, unaware that the man who had spent 30 days trying to erase him had just made the last mistake of his career. 8:07 a.m. The elevator opened onto the 47th floor. and Marcus Cole stepped into the corridor carrying a laptop bag and the particular stillness of a man who has already decided how far he is willing to go. The boardroom glass was floor to ceiling, and through it he could see 14 directors settling into chairs that cost more than his truck. Harrington sat at the right hand of the table, spine rigid, folio squared in front of him, wearing the composed expression of a man who believed his midnight email had already won the war. Victoria was last to enter. She took the chair at the head of the table, and Marcus noticed what no one else in the room could have: the faint crease in her left hand where she'd been gripping something tightly recently, and the slight redness around her eyes that had nothing to do with fatigue. She had read the archive folder again. He was certain of it. Harrington moved first. He stood before Victoria had finished calling the meeting to order, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to controlling the sequence of events. "Honey, before we proceed, the board should be made aware of a serious security concern. The individual Victoria invited into this company has a criminal record that was brought to my attention last evening." He opened his folio and produced a single sheet, the fabricated arrest report, holding it at an angle so the directors closest to him could read the header. "I trust the board will agree that this matter requires immediate—" "Mr. Harrington." Marcus's voice carried no volume and no hurry, as he opened his laptop and turned the screen toward the table. "The document you're holding was created 72 hours ago on a personal computer registered to your home network. The metadata identifies the author as user D.Harrington. The timestamp reads 11:43 p.m. Tuesday. The forensic analysis was conducted by the Digital Investigations Unit retained by attorney James Whitfield of Birmingham. And a certified copy has already been submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room went silent the way a room goes silent when the floor shifts beneath it. Not gradually, but all at once, every body recalibrating to a new gravity. Harrington's hand, still holding the forged document, did not lower, but his face lost 2 shades of color in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Marcus did not wait for recovery. He advanced the first slide. "My name is Marcus Elijah Cole. I graduated from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 2014 with a Bachelor of Science in Automotive Engineering. I maintained a 3.87 GPA and published 2 peer-reviewed papers on hybrid powertrain thermal management. I left the industry when my wife was killed on I-85 because my daughter needed a father more than Detroit needed another engineer. None of that is relevant to what I'm about to show you, but I mention it because for 6 weeks, the man sitting to your right has worked very hard to make sure you'd never take me seriously enough to listen." Second slide. 73 names arranged in columns. Name, hire date, termination date, stated reason, actual performance score. Every row told the same story in different handwriting. 73 black employees. Everyone rated 4.2 or above. Everyone terminated for language that rotates just enough to avoid pattern recognition. Cultural misfit, leadership gap, strategic realignment. He paused, letting the directors read. Average performance review duration for white employees, 5.1 minutes. For black employees, 2.3. Promotion rate for white managers over 6 years, 34%. For black managers, 0. Third slide. An internal email from Harrington to HR Director Candace Morrow, dated March 14th, 2019. Marcus read the only line that mattered aloud. "Remind the team, Ashford alignment standards apply." You know what that means. He let the sentence sit in the room like smoke. Fourth slide. The document Victoria had already seen alone on the archive floor. The 1994 board resolution signed by Richard Ashford Sr., establishing cultural alignment standards in language so carefully constructed that it never once named race, and never once meant anything else. This is not one man's prejudice. This is a 30-year institutional architecture designed to systematically exclude Black employees from leadership, maintained across 4 COOs, exposed by none. 247 employees affected across 3 decades. An estimated $14.2 million in stolen wages and lost career value. Fifth slide. 8 signed witness statements. Rosa Gutierrez's affidavit, the DOJ preliminary inquiry notification, Attorney Whitfield's contact information, in the forensic metadata report on Harrington's fabricated criminal record. Marcus closed the laptop. The room held its breath. Victoria stood. She did not look at Marcus. She looked at Harrington, and when she spoke, her voice held the low, controlled force of a woman who had spent the last 12 hours grieving an inheritance she never asked for and would not defend. Is this true, Derek? Harrington's jaw worked. His gaze swept the table for allies and found none. 14 faces turned away or turned down, the universal geometry of men distancing themselves from a sinking vessel. He tried once more, reaching for the authority that had carried him for 11 years. I built this company's operations from the ground up, Victoria. Everything I've done has been to protect. You built it on the backs of 73 families who never got the chance to build theirs. Marcus's voice remained level, but something beneath it had shifted. Not anger, but a weight that carried the accumulated gravity of every kitchen table where he'd sat across from someone holding a termination letter they didn't deserve. Darnell Washington designed the engine in your highest revenue vehicle, and you erased his name from the patents. Patricia Hayes grew the Southeast region by 23%, and you transferred her to a windowless office with no staff. These aren't data points, Mr. Harrington. These are people who went home to their children and had to explain why being excellent wasn't enough. The board voted 12-2 for immediate termination. The 2 dissenting members were informed that their own conduct would be subject to independent review. Harrington was escorted from the building by security at 9:31 a.m., 11 years of tenure collapsing into 11 minutes between the boardroom and the parking garage. He did not speak. When the elevator doors closed on a face that had already begun the long process of understanding what it looks like when the architecture you built becomes the structure that buries you. Victoria found Marcus in the hallway afterward. The tower hummed around them, phones ringing, voices low and stunned, the particular electricity of an institution absorbing a shock it cannot yet name. She stood in front of him, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you needed to see it with your own eyes, not filtered through mine. She nodded, slow and heavy. My father-in-law built this. I married into a house and never checked the foundation. Now you know. And what you do next is what your daughter will remember. The weeks that followed moved with the accelerating momentum of a system finally correcting itself. CNN, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Reuters broke the story within 72 hours. Harrington, Candace Morrow, and David Price faced federal obstruction charges. The Department of Justice expanded its inquiry across 4 states, uncovering parallel discrimination structures in 3 Ashford subsidiaries, a network that had touched 247 lives over 30 years without generating a single successful internal complaint. Victoria announced a comprehensive restitution program, $8.2 million in direct compensation, or an independent diversity oversight board with subpoena authority, and a public commitment to reform that she delivered at a press conference without notes and without flinching. Darnell Washington returned to Ashford Motors as chief engineer, walking into the design lab where his original intake manifold drawings still hung on the wall, unsigned. He signed them on his first day back. Chiroza Gutierrez was appointed head of corporate compliance, the woman who had hidden evidence in her apartment for 4 years, now charged with ensuring no one would ever need to hide it again. Marcus accepted the role of director of the Ashford Community Automotive Foundation, not because of the salary or the title, but because he had seen what happens when capable hands are denied the chance to work, and he intended to spend the rest of his career making sure the tools reached the people who needed them. Victoria offered him the position in her office on a Tuesday afternoon, with Atlanta spread out behind her in gold autumn light. He studied the offer letter for a long time. "I didn't do this for a job." Her smile was quiet and knowing. "I know. That's exactly why you're the right person for it." There was no kiss, no declaration. Just 2 people standing in a room full of late sunlight, understanding that some connections are forged in damage and tempered by the slow, patient work of choosing to be better than the worst thing that ever happened to you. 1 year later, the Ashford Community Auto Center opened in a converted warehouse on the south side of Atlanta. 14 mechanics, black, white, Latino, 2 refugees from Somalia, worked under a sign that read, "Everyone deserves a ride home." Marcus oversaw operations with the same calm precision he brought to everything. And if you watched him closely, you could still see the faint crescent of grease along his left wrist, because some marks are not stains. They are credentials. On a Saturday morning in October, Maya burst through the center's front door, waving a gold ribbon above her head like a battle flag. First place, District Science Fair. Project title: How Engines Work, a Story of 4 Strokes. Lily Ashford was 2 steps behind her, breathless and grinning, out shouting the results to anyone who would listen. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching her daughter chase Marcus's daughter through a room full of tools and light and second chances, and she did not try to hide the tears. That evening, the 4 of them sat on the porch of the small house Marcus had rented in a quiet neighborhood where the lawns were green and the neighbors waved. Maya and Lily lay on their stomachs in the grass, to designing what they called a rocket engine out of cardboard tubes and optimism. Marcus watched them from the porch steps, a glass of sweet tea in his hand, the October sky bruising into purple above the tree line. Maya ran back to him, breathless. "Daddy, look, we figured out the propulsion sequence." He pulled her close. 4 strokes. She planted her fists on her hips, gap-toothed and certain. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Victoria sat beside him on the step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You didn't just find my daughter, Marcus." Her voice was soft, stripped of boardrooms and press conferences, carrying only the raw frequency of a woman who had learned the difference between what money builds and what it cannot buy. "You found me, too." He looked out at the yard where 2 girls were building an engine that would never fly and didn't need to, because the point was never the destination. It was the hands that built it. It was the 4 strokes, the breath in, the pressure, the fire, the release. It was 73 names on a wall inside a warehouse on the south side of Atlanta, each one framed, each one a family restored, each one proof that the most dangerous thing in the world is a quiet man who knows what's right and refuses to look away. Marcus Cole did not set out to change the world. He set out to raise his daughter and fix what was broken. Sometimes that is exactly how the world changes, not with speeches, not with billions, but with a man who kneels down, looks a frightened child in the eye, and says the only words that have ever mattered. It's okay. I'm here.